8 sailors disappeared from an ore freighter on Lake Superior in November 1892. The ninth man was found hiding in the coal bunker, unable to speak. The SS Quinault drifted empty through brutal seas, engines still warm, meals half-eaten, lifeboats secured. Everything looked normal. But where were 8 grown men? Only Jakob Henriksen remained, cowering in the coal bunker with torn fingernails and scraped hands, as if he'd been clawing at metal walls. His eyes tracked movement, but no words would come. The cargo hold told a different story. Strange scratches covered the interior walls, made by human fingernails from the inside. The crew's own logs described sounds from below, sounds that couldn't come from iron ore. 8 men descended into that hold on November 13th. None ever returned. Jakob saw what happened down there. He knows why his crewmates vanished from a locked ship in the middle of Lake Superior. But 32 years in an asylum, and he never spoke a single word about that night. What did Jakob witness in the cargo hold that was so terrifying he chose silence over truth? Before we descend into the hold, subscribe and comment your city and local time, curious where these maritime mysteries reach. The lighthouse keeper at Split Rock spotted her first, a dark smudge against the gray November waters of Lake Superior, riding heavy in the swells with no running lights. Thomas Kellerman had been tending the beacon for 14 years, and he knew the silhouette of every freighter that hauled iron ore down from Duluth to the steel mills in Cleveland. The SS Quinault was supposed to be making that exact run, but something about her drift pattern set his teeth on edge. She moved like a ship with no hand on the wheel, wallowing in the troughs between waves, her bow wandering aimlessly as the wind pushed her toward the rocky shoreline. Kellerman triggered the steam whistle, 3 long blasts that echoed across the water. No response. He tried again, then reached for the telegraph key to summon the rescue tug Guardian from 2 harbors. The message he tapped out was brief and professional, but his hand trembled slightly as he worked the brass lever. Ore freighter drifting without lights. Appears disabled. Send assistance immediate. Captain William Foster brought the Guardian alongside the Quinault in conditions that would have challenged a man half his age. The ore freighter towered above the smaller tug, her rust-streaked hull rising and falling in the heavy seas, while Foster's crew fought to secure grappling lines. Ice formed on the rigging faster than they could knock it away, and the wind howled through the superstructure with a sound like tearing canvas. Foster had pulled dozens of disabled vessels to safety over his 23 years running rescue operations on the Great Lakes. But the Quinault presented a puzzle that made his stomach clench with unease. Her engines had stopped, but the stack still radiated warmth that melted the ice collecting on the metal. Steam leaked from various fittings, indicating the boilers maintained pressure even though no one tended them. The cargo hatches remained properly secured with heavy canvas covers, and her lifeboats hung undisturbed in their davits. Facts that ruled out the most obvious explanations for an abandoned ship. Pirates never operated this far north on the lakes, and mutinies typically left evidence of violence or hasty departure. Yet the Quinault drifted empty as a coffin, showing no signs of struggle or emergency evacuation. Foster's boarding party climbed the rope ladder to find a scene that violated every principle of seamanship they understood. Coffee still steamed in tin cups on the galley table, and half-eaten meals sat at each place, setting as if the crew had simply vanished between one bite and the next. Personal effects remained undisturbed in the crew quarters, tobacco pouches, letters from home, even money left openly on bunks. The captain's cabin showed meticulous order, with charts properly stowed and the chronometer still ticking steadily. But no voices answered their calls, and no footsteps responded to their shouts as they searched every compartment above deck. The ship's logbook lay open on the chart table, Captain Henrik Morrison's precise handwriting filling the pages with entries that chronicled a routine voyage from Duluth. The manifest showed 9 crew members had departed on November 12th with a full load of iron ore bound for Cleveland, standard cargo for the season. Nothing unusual about the destination or the shipping company. Morrison's final entry, dated November 13th at 1800 hours, read with characteristic attention to detail. Weather holding steady from the northwest. Barometer 2987 and rising. Making good time at 8 knots, all hands accounted for and in good health. The ink was still slightly damp. Foster's men began a systematic search of the lower decks, their lanterns throwing dancing shadows on the bulkheads as they moved through passages that should have bustled with activity. The engine room showed signs of recent operation, coal dust on the floor plates, tools arranged for maintenance work, the massive steam engine still clicking as hot metal contracted in the cold air. But no engineer answered their calls, and the fireboxes had burned down to cold ash. In the crew's mess, they found evidence of the interrupted meal, soup growing cold in bowls, bread torn but not finished, playing cards scattered on the table as if dropped mid-hand. It was Foster's youngest crewman, Samuel Brooks, who discovered the scratches. While searching the forward cargo hold, his lantern illuminated score marks in the metal bulkheads, parallel lines that looked disturbingly like claw marks, though what could make such impressions in quarter-inch steel defied explanation. The scratches appeared fresh, with bright metal showing through the paint, and they seemed to follow a pattern that suggested desperate scraping rather than accidental damage. Brooks called for Foster, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space, but the captain was already examining a more disturbing discovery in the coal bunker. Jakob Henriksen crouched in the far corner of the coal storage area, pressed against the curved hull plates like an animal seeking the deepest possible shelter. The 19-year-old coal tender stared at the rescue team with wide eyes that tracked their movement, but showed no recognition or relief. His fingernails were torn and bloody, and deep scratches covered his hands and forearms, injuries consistent with clawing at metal surfaces. When Foster spoke to him, Henriksen's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, as if he were trying to form words that wouldn't come. Dried tears streaked his face, and his whole body trembled with exhaustion or terror. The ship's manifest identified Henriksen as the youngest crew member, signed on just 3 months earlier for his first season hauling ore. His personnel file described him as reliable and hard-working, with no history of mental illness or behavioral problems. Yet the young man they found cowering in the coal bunker seemed broken in ways that went beyond physical injury. When they tried to help him stand, he recoiled from their touch and pointed repeatedly toward the cargo hold, his mouth working frantically around words that never emerged. Foster ordered his men to continue searching while he examined the crew manifest more carefully. 8 names besides Henriksen, all experienced sailors with good records, men who knew their business and wouldn't abandon ship without cause. Captain Morrison commanded respect throughout the Great Lakes shipping community, and his officers had sailed together for several seasons. First Mate Thomas Kellerman was noted for his careful attention to crew welfare, while Chief Engineer Henry Vaughan had never lost a ship to mechanical failure in 20 years of service. These were not men who would panic or desert their posts, yet somehow 8 experienced sailors had vanished from a locked ship in the middle of Lake Superior. The rescue team spent 2 hours searching every compartment, storage area, and hiding place large enough to conceal a human body. They found no trace of the missing crew, no blood, no signs of violence, no indication of where 8 men might have gone. The cargo hold contained exactly what the manifest promised: thousands of tons of iron ore pellets loaded according to proper procedures and secured for transport. But the strange scratches on the interior walls suggested someone had been trapped inside and tried desperately to claw their way out, leaving gouges in the metal that no human fingernail should have been able to create. As Foster prepared to take the Keweenaw under tow, he made one final entry in his own log. Vessel found abandoned with full cargo intact. 1 crew member recovered alive, but unable to communicate. 8 men missing without trace. Cause unknown. He stared at those words for a long time before closing the leather-bound book, knowing they represented the beginning of a mystery that would haunt the Great Lakes shipping community for decades to come. The SS Keweenaw had become a ghost ship in broad daylight, and the only witness to her crew's fate remained locked in silence that might never be broken. Maritime Inspector Charles Whitmore arrived in 2 harbors on the morning train, carrying a leather satchel full of forms, and a growing sense that the Keweenaw case would resist easy explanation. He had investigated 17 shipping accidents in his 12 years with the Lake Carriers Association, and experience had taught him that most maritime mysteries dissolved under methodical examination of logs, manifests, and weather records. Ships didn't simply lose their crews without leaving evidence. Men fell overboard in storms, succumbed to carbon monoxide from faulty stoves, or abandoned vessels during fires that consumed the proof of their departure. But the preliminary reports from Captain Foster described a scene that challenged every principle Whitmore understood about maritime disasters. The SS Keweenaw's logbook told a story of routine competence that made the crew's disappearance even more baffling. Captain Henrik Morrison had maintained meticulous records throughout the voyage, documenting weather conditions, engine performance, and crew status with the obsessive detail of a man who understood that his logbook might someday be the only witness to events aboard his ship. The entries began on November 12th, with standard departure procedures from Duluth's ore docks. Departed Slip 7 at 800 hours. Cargo manifest shows 4,847 tons iron ore pellets loaded per Great Northern Railroad specifications. Weather clear, wind northwest at 12 knots. Full crew complement of 9 men, all hands reported fit for duty. Morrison's handwriting remained steady and professional throughout the voyage, recording routine navigational fixes and engine room reports with mechanical precision. November 12th, 2,000 hours. A beam split rock light, making 8 knots on course, 115 degrees magnetic, barometer steady at 30.12 inches, coal consumption normal, water level in boilers satisfactory. The entries continued through November 13th with similar attention to detail, noting minor course corrections to avoid other shipping traffic and routine maintenance performed by the engineering crew. Nothing in Morrison's careful records suggested unusual weather, mechanical problems, or crew difficulties that might explain the subsequent disaster. Yet Whitmore found subtle anomalies that suggested trouble brewing beneath the surface of Morrison's professional documentation. First Mate Thomas Kellerman had maintained his own informal log, jotting observations in the margins of his navigation workbook that revealed growing unease among the crew. November 12th. Men seem nervous about something. Can't put finger on what has them spooked. November 13th. Jacob asking again about getting off at next port. 3rd time this voyage he's wanted to quit. Something has that boy rattled. The entries painted a picture of mounting tension that Morrison's official log completely ignored, suggesting either the captain remained unaware of his crew's concerns or deliberately chose not to record them. The ship's radio operator, William O'Malley, had maintained detailed transmission logs that documented routine communications with shore stations and other vessels throughout the voyage. His records showed regular position reports transmitted according to company protocol, with no indication of distress or unusual circumstances until the final entry. November 13th, 2130 hours. Attempted transmission to Duluth Marine Radio. Signal strength poor due to atmospheric interference. We'll retry at next scheduled contact time. The next line showed the beginning of what appeared to be an emergency transmission. November 14th, 0230 hours, urgent message to any station, SS Keweenaw position approximately. The entry ended mid-sentence, with no explanation for why O'Malley stopped transmitting. Weather records from shore stations confirmed Morrison's reports of stable conditions throughout November 13th, ruling out the possibility that a sudden storm had overwhelmed the vessel. The Duluth Weather Bureau recorded northwest winds at 15 knots with occasional gusts to 25, well within normal parameters for November shipping on Lake Superior. Barometric pressure remained steady around 30 inches, and visibility stayed above 5 miles throughout the period when the crew disappeared. These were not conditions that would challenge experienced sailors or force emergency evacuation of the vessel, yet 8 men had somehow vanished during what should have been a routine night at sea. The crew manifest revealed backgrounds that made their disappearance even more mysterious. Captain Morrison commanded respect throughout the Great Lakes shipping community, with 23 years of experience navigating the treacherous waters between Duluth and the steel ports of Ohio. His personnel file contained letters of commendation from shipping company executives and insurance investigators who praised his safety record and professional competence. First Mate Kellerman had sailed with Morrison for 3 seasons, earning promotion through careful attention to crew welfare and navigation duties. Chief Engineer Vaughn brought 20 years of steam engine experience to his position, with expertise in the complex systems that kept ore freighters operating in harsh conditions. Even the younger crew members showed solid records of reliable service. Radio operator O'Malley had worked for the Great Northern Steamship Company since 1890, maintaining perfect attendance and receiving praise for his careful attention to communication protocols. The deckhands and coal passers, men whose names appeared regularly in Morrison's duty rosters, had sailed together for multiple seasons without incident. These were not inexperienced sailors who might panic in a crisis or abandon their posts without cause. Yet somehow, 8 competent men had left their ship between Morrison's final log entry at 1800 hours on November 13th and the vessel's discovery drifting empty 14 hours later. Whitmore's examination of the physical evidence raised more questions than it answered. The cargo hold contained exactly what the manifest promised: 4,847 tons of iron ore pellets loaded according to standard procedures and properly secured for transport. The ore came from the Mesabi Range mines near Hibbing, Minnesota, shipped by rail to Duluth, and loaded aboard the Keweenaw through mechanical conveyors that left no opportunity for contamination or sabotage. Chemical analysis of ore samples revealed nothing unusual: standard iron content with trace amounts of silica and other minerals typically found in Mesabi Range deposits. Yet the strange scratches on the cargo hold bulkheads suggested someone had been trapped inside and tried desperately to claw their way out. The scratches themselves defied easy explanation. Metallurgical examination revealed gouges in quarter-inch steel plate that would require significant force to create, far beyond what human fingernails could accomplish under normal circumstances. The marks appeared fresh, with bright metal showing through layers of paint and primer, and they followed patterns that suggested repeated scraping motions rather than accidental damage from shifting cargo. Most disturbing, the scratches seemed to originate from multiple locations within the hold, as if several people had been clawing at the walls simultaneously. Jakob Henriksen remained the investigation's most important witness and its most frustrating mystery. The young coal tender had been transported to St. Mary's Hospital in Duluth, where doctors found him physically unharmed except for the torn fingernails and scratches that covered his hands and forearms. His vital signs remained normal, and he showed no evidence of head injury, poisoning, or illness that might explain his inability to speak. Yet every attempt to communicate with him failed completely. He would stare at questioners with wide, frightened eyes, his mouth moving soundlessly, as if trying to form words that wouldn't come. When doctors showed him photographs of his missing crewmates, Henriksen would become agitated, pointing repeatedly toward images of the cargo hold while making desperate gestures that no one could interpret. The hospital's alienist, Dr. Margaret Brennan, had examined hundreds of patients suffering from various forms of mental distress, but Henriksen's condition puzzled her completely. "The young man appears to understand everything said to him," she wrote in her medical report. "His responses to simple commands suggest intact cognitive function, and he shows appropriate emotional reactions to stimuli. However, he seems unable or unwilling to produce speech, and his behavior suggests he witnessed something so traumatic that his mind has simply shut down his ability to communicate about it." She recommended extended observation and treatment, but privately expressed doubt that Henriksen would ever recover his ability to speak about the events aboard the Keweenaw. As Whitmore compiled his preliminary report, he found himself confronting the possibility that the SS Keweenaw had become the scene of something that transcended normal maritime disaster. 8 experienced sailors had vanished from a locked ship without leaving any trace of their departure, while the 9th crew member survived in a state of traumatic silence that might never be broken. The physical evidence suggested desperate attempts to escape from inside the cargo hold, yet the hold contained nothing but iron ore and showed no signs of the missing men. Whatever had happened during those crucial hours between November 13th and 14th defied rational explanation, leaving Whitmore to wonder if some mysteries were simply too dark for human understanding to illuminate. The personal effects recovered from the crew quarters revealed a story that official logs had deliberately omitted. Inspector Whitmore spread the contents of 8 sea chests across the dining table of the Two Harbors Marine Station, each collection of belongings offering glimpses into the final days aboard the SS Keweenaw that Captain Morrison's meticulous records had failed to document. Among Chief Engineer Henry Vaughan's possessions, Whitmore discovered a small leather notebook wedged behind a photograph of the man's wife and children, a maintenance diary that Vaughan had kept separate from the official engineering logs required by company protocol. Vaughan's private entries painted a picture of growing mechanical anomalies that should have concerned any competent engineer. November 11th. Strange vibrations in the engine room during third watch. Checked all bearings and drive shafts, no obvious source. Vibrations seem to originate from below. Possibly cargo hold area. Will investigate further. November 12th. Vibrations continuing. Pattern suggests rhythmic motion rather than mechanical failure, almost like something shifting in the hold, but cargo manifest shows proper loading and securing. The engineer's handwriting remained steady and professional, but his observations described phenomena that challenged his 20 years of experience with steam-powered vessels. The entries grew more detailed and troubling as the voyage progressed. November 13th. Vibrations now accompanied by metallic scraping sounds that seemed to echo through the hull plates. Investigated cargo hold with First Mate Kellerman. Ore load appears properly secured. No signs of shifting. However, temperature in hold measures several degrees warmer than ambient air temperature, despite November weather. Cannot determine source of excess heat. Vaughan had underlined the final sentence twice, suggesting his growing concern about conditions that his engineering knowledge couldn't explain. Radio operator William O'Malley had hidden his own unofficial log inside a tobacco pouch, documenting communications that never appeared in the ship's official radio records. His entries revealed attempts to contact other vessels about unusual conditions aboard the Keweenaw, transmissions that violated company policy against discussing internal ship matters over public airwaves. November 12th. Attempted private communication with SS Mataafa regarding strange sounds reported by crew. Mataafa operator reported similar complaints from other ore freighters this season, particularly vessels carrying cargo from newer mine sites. Company policy prohibits discussion of such matters on wireless, but pattern suggests widespread problem. O'Malley's most significant entry described his final transmission attempt. November 14th, 0230 hours, awakened by sounds from cargo hold unlike anything in 22 years at sea. Crew members gathering on deck, speaking in whispers about voices coming from below. Captain Morrison nowhere to be found. Attempted emergency transmission to Duluth Marine Radio, but signal cut off mid-sentence. Radio equipment functioning normally, yet transmission seems blocked by unknown interference. Will attempt alternate frequency. The entry ended abruptly, with no explanation for why O'Malley stopped writing. Among Jakob Henriksen's possessions, Whitmore found the young man's journal wrapped in oilcloth and hidden beneath his spare clothing. The early entries described routine shipboard life with the detailed observations of someone experiencing his first season on the Great Lakes. November 10th. Coal bunkers properly organized. Engineer Vaughn teaching me proper firing techniques for maintaining steady steam pressure. Crew friendly, though some seem nervous about this particular cargo load. First mate says it's normal pre-winter anxiety. The handwriting was neat and careful, showing the education that had qualified Henriksen for his position despite his youth. The journal's tone changed dramatically as the voyage progressed. November 12th. Cannot sleep due to sounds from cargo hold. Other crew members hear it too, though Captain Morrison dismisses our concerns as normal settling of ore cargo. But I've worked coal ships before. This is different. Sounds almost like voices calling from deep underground, though engineer says that's impossible given ship's construction. Henriksen's handwriting became less steady, with words occasionally crossed out and rewritten as if his thoughts were racing faster than his pen could follow. The final entries in Henriksen's journal revealed a young man descending into terror. November 13th. Something wrong with the ore we loaded. Crew members report strange dreams, always the same images of dark tunnels extending deeper than any mind should go. Engineer says cargo hold temperature continues rising despite cold weather. Tonight I saw first mate standing at the hold, grating, listening to sounds from below. When I asked what he heard, he said, "They're calling us down." Don't know what he meant, but his eyes looked strange, almost eager. The entry continued in handwriting that grew increasingly erratic. Captain Morrison finally went below to investigate around midnight. He came back changed somehow, speaking in whispers about deeper workings and what the mine's connected to. Said we needed to complete the journey before dawn. Henriksen's final entry consisted of fragments that suggested mounting panic. They're all going down now one by one. Engineer first, then the deckhands, then O'Malley. Each one comes back, speaking of voices that call from beneath the ore. But they don't look right when they return. Something in their eyes has changed. Captain says it's time for me to join them. Says the cargo needs all hands to guide it home. But I can hear what they heard down there, and those aren't human voices calling from the hold. Those are something else entirely, something that came up with the ore from deep places that should have stayed sealed. I'm hiding in the coal bunker. Won't go down. Can't make me go down. But they keep calling, and the voices are getting louder. The investigation took a disturbing turn when Whitmore examined the ship's cargo manifest more carefully. The SS Quinaw had loaded her ore from 3 different sources during her stop in Duluth, standard procedure that allowed shipping companies to maximize cargo loads by combining shipments from multiple mines. 2 loads came from established Mesabi Range operations with decades of safe production history. But the 3rd shipment originated from a newer site that had been hastily opened to meet increased demand from steel mills in Cleveland and Pittsburgh. The paperwork identified this source as the Ishpaming Deep Mine, a recently developed shaft that had begun operations only 6 months earlier. Railroad shipping records revealed that the Ishpaming Deep Mine had experienced unusual difficulties since opening. 3 separate work crews had refused to continue excavation, citing impossible sounds from deep underground, and equipment failures that couldn't be explained by normal mining hazards. The mine's original survey had called for excavation to a depth of 200 feet, but actual operations had extended the shaft to nearly 400 feet when miners encountered a natural cavern system that seemed to extend far beyond their ability to explore. Company records noted that ore extracted from the deepest levels showed unusual acoustic properties. Samples would ring with strange harmonics when struck, almost as if the metal retained memory of sounds from deep underground. The most troubling discovery came in correspondence between the Ishpaming Deep Mines operations manager and the parent company's board of directors. A letter dated October 15, 1892, described persistent reports from miners of voices echoing from unmapped cavern systems that intersect with our deepest shafts. 3 men have refused to work below the 300-foot level, claiming the voices call to them in languages that aren't human. Recommend temporary suspension of deep extraction until we can map the full extent of underground cavern network. The company's response, dated October 20th, was brief and dismissive. Deep mining operations will continue as scheduled. Worker complaints about voices should be addressed through disciplinary measures rather than operational changes. As Whitmore compiled evidence from personal journals, cargo manifests, and mining company correspondence, he began to see a pattern that suggested the SS Keweenaw had become the victim of something far more complex than a simple maritime disaster. The ore loaded in her cargo hold had come from depths that connected to unmapped underground systems, bringing with it something that had called to her crew with voices that weren't entirely human. 8 experienced sailors had heard those calls and descended into the hold to investigate, drawn by promises or threats that their journals could only hint at. Only Jacob Henriksen had possessed the strength or terror to resist, hiding in the coal bunker while his crewmates disappeared into depths that shouldn't have existed aboard a ship sailing the surface waters of Lake Superior. The implications of his discovery left Whitmore staring at the evidence spread across the table, knowing that his official report would have to find rational explanations for events that seemed to transcend human understanding. Yet the personal accounts from the Keweenaw's crew painted a picture of something ancient and hungry, stirring in the deep places of the earth, using iron ore as a conduit to reach the surface world and claim new victims for purposes that remained terrifyingly unclear. The pages of Jacob Henriksen's journal that Inspector Whitmore discovered hidden beneath the young man's mattress told the story of November 13th through the eyes of someone slowly descending into terror. The handwriting deteriorated with each entry, starting with careful script and degrading into frantic scrawls that suggested a mind grappling with experiences that defied rational explanation. Whitmore had seen similar deterioration in the journals of sailors who survived shipwrecks or prolonged exposure, but Henriksen's account described horrors that occurred aboard a functioning vessel during what should have been a routine voyage. The entries began at sunset on November 13th. Captain Morrison finally decided to investigate the sounds from the cargo hold himself. He went down around 1800 hours with Engineer Vaughn and 2 of the deckhands. They carried lanterns and rope, planning to check the ore load for shifting that might explain the strange noises we've been hearing. I watched from the main deck as their lights disappeared down the cargo hatch. That was 3 hours ago and they haven't returned. First Mate Kellerman is pacing the wheelhouse, checking his pocket watch every few minutes and muttering about proper procedures. The journal continued with increasingly desperate observations. 2100 hours, Captain Morrison and his party returned from the cargo hold, but something has changed about them. Morrison's face looked pale in the lantern light, and he spoke in whispers to Kellerman about deeper connections and what the ore remembers. Engineer Vaughn kept nodding and saying they needed to follow it down to the source. The deckhands seemed excited rather than frightened, talking about voices that promised answers to questions they didn't know they had. None of them would explain what they found in the hold, but they all agreed that more men needed to go down and complete the understanding. Henrikson's account of the midnight hours painted a picture of systematic madness consuming the crew. Captain Morrison gathered everyone on deck except me, said I was too young to understand what they'd discovered. Radio operator O'Malley tried to send a distress signal, but Morrison stopped him, claiming there was no distress, only opportunity for deeper knowledge. One by one, they began descending into the cargo hold. Kellerman went first, then the remaining deckhands, then O'Malley himself. Each time someone went down, they would return, speaking in whispers about what called to them from beneath the oar. The most chilling entry described the transformation Henriksen witnessed in his crewmates. They come back different each time. Their eyes reflect the lantern light strangely, and they move with purpose that wasn't there before. Morrison keeps talking about the deep workings and how the mind connected to passages that have waited since before men walked above ground. Says the voices promise to show them truths that surface dwellers were never meant to understand. When I asked what voices he meant, he smiled in a way that made my blood freeze and said, "The ones that have been calling since we loaded the ore, the ones that remember when these caverns extended all the way to the lake bottom." The journal's final coherent entry described Henriksen's growing terror as dawn approached. 0200 hours. They're all acting like they share some secret knowledge that excludes me, keep speaking in whispers, and looking toward the cargo hold with expressions of eager anticipation. Captain Morrison says it's time for me to join the deeper understanding, but when I look down that cargo hatch, I can hear what they hear, voices calling from impossible depths, speaking words that make my teeth ache and my vision blur. Those aren't human voices, no matter what Morrison claims. There's something else down there, something that came up with the ore from places that should have stayed sealed forever. The handwriting became increasingly erratic as Henriksen described his final hours of consciousness. "They're trying to force me to go down now." Morrison and Kellerman holding my arm, saying I need to complete the crew's understanding before we reach Cleveland. But I can hear the voices getting stronger, and they're not promising knowledge. They're promising something else entirely. The scratches on the cargo hold walls aren't from people trying to get out. They're from people trying to keep something else from getting in, or maybe trying to claw their way deeper, following voices that promise things no human mind should want to understand. The journal's final entry consisted of fragments written in handwriting so shaky it was barely legible. "Hiding in coal bunker. They can't find me here, but the voices are getting louder, coming up through the hull plates themselves. Captain Morrison standing outside the bunker door, saying the ore needs all hands to guide it home to the deep places. But his voice sounds wrong now, like it's coming from somewhere much deeper than his throat. O'Malley keeps tapping on the metal walls, not Morse code, but some other pattern that makes the coal dust dance in impossible spirals. The chronometer stopped at 0233 hours, but time feels different now, stretched and twisted like the voices that call from beneath the ore. They are not my crewmates anymore. Don't know what they've become, but they're not human, and they want me to join them in whatever place they've found beneath the cargo." Coast Guard investigators who examined the SS Quinaw after she was towed to port found evidence that supported Henriksen's account in disturbing ways. The ship's chronometer had indeed stopped at 2:33 a.m. on November 14th, despite showing no mechanical damage that would explain the failure. The cargo hold contained thousands of tons of iron ore that appeared normal by every measurable standard, yet acoustic tests revealed that the ore produced strange harmonics when subjected to sound waves, almost as if the metal particles retained memory of sounds from their place of origin deep underground. The scratches on the cargo hold bulkheads showed a pattern that metallurgical experts found impossible to explain through normal means. The gouges appeared to have been made by multiple sets of human fingernails working simultaneously, but the depth and extent of the scratches suggested superhuman strength and persistence. More disturbing, chemical analysis of residue found in the deepest scratches revealed traces of human tissue and blood, as if whoever made the marks had continued clawing long after their fingernails and fingertips had been worn away. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, the maritime historical investigator who would later compile the definitive account of the Keweenaw mystery, discovered the most significant piece of evidence in recently unsealed mining company archives. The Ishpaming deep mine had been hastily closed just 3 weeks after the SS Keweenaw disappeared, following reports of multiple worker disappearances and acoustic anomalies that made continued operations impossible. Company records noted that the mine shaft had intersected with natural cavern systems of unprecedented depth and unknown extent, connecting to underground passages that seemed to carry sounds and voices from impossible distances. The mine's final operation report, dated December 1, 1892, contained a notation that sent chills through anyone who read Henrikson's journal. Recommend permanent sealing of all deep shafts. Workers report persistent voices calling from unmapped cavern systems, speaking in languages that predate human settlement of this region. 3 men followed these voices into the deep tunnels and have not returned. Remaining crew refuses to work below 200-foot level. Mine shaft appears to extend far deeper than originally surveyed, possibly connecting to underwater cavern networks beneath Lake Superior itself. The implications of this discovery forced investigators to consider possibilities that challenged every assumption about the Keweenaw disaster. The ore loaded in her cargo hold had come from depths that connected to vast underground systems, carrying with it something that could call to human minds with promises of knowledge too terrible to resist. 8 experienced sailors had heard those calls and followed them into depths that existed not just beneath their ship, but beneath the very foundations of the world they thought they understood. The official investigation into the SS Keweenaw concluded on December 15, 1892, with a report that satisfied no one who had examined the evidence firsthand. Inspector Whitmore submitted his findings to the Lake Carriers Association with the reluctant notation, "Death by misadventure during severe weather conditions," despite weather records that clearly documented calm seas throughout the period when 8 men vanished from a locked cargo hold. The maritime insurance companies accepted the determination and paid claims to the families of the missing sailors. But privately, investigators shared doubts about conclusions that ignored physical evidence too disturbing to include in public records. Jakob Henriksen was transferred to the Northern Michigan Asylum for the Insane on January 3, 1893, after 3 months of medical observation, failed to restore his ability to speak about the events aboard the Keweenaw. Dr. Margaret Brennan's final psychiatric evaluation described a young man whose cognitive functions remained intact, but whose mind had seemingly constructed impenetrable barriers around memories too traumatic to access consciously. Patient responds appropriately to simple commands and shows recognition of familiar objects and faces, she wrote in her case notes. However, any attempt to discuss his recent maritime experience results in extreme agitation, followed by periods of catatonic withdrawal that can last for days. The asylum's treatment records documented Henriksen's behavior throughout his 31 years of confinement, revealing patterns that troubled even experienced alienists who had treated hundreds of patients suffering from various forms of mental distress. Unlike other inmates who gradually deteriorated or occasionally improved, Henriksen remained remarkably consistent in his condition, alert and responsive to routine interactions, but completely unable to communicate about whatever he had witnessed in the cargo hold of the SS Keweenaw. He would spend hours each day drawing the same images with whatever materials he could obtain, creating detailed sketches that showed a ship's cargo hold from multiple perspectives. The drawings that filled dozens of sketchbooks over the decades revealed a mind obsessed with documenting something that words could never adequately describe. The early sketches showed the Keweenaw's cargo hold exactly as investigators had found it, with accurate details of the ore load configuration, the scratched bulkheads, and the cargo hatch positions that demonstrated Henriksen's precise memory of the ship's layout. But as the years passed, his drawings began incorporating elements that suggested deeper knowledge of what had occurred during those final hours aboard the vessel. Later sketches showed the cargo hold from impossible perspectives, as if drawn by someone viewing the scene from beneath the ore load itself. These images depicted human figures descending through the ore like swimmers moving through dark water, their faces expressing not terror, but eager anticipation, as they followed some unseen guide toward depths that extended far below the ship's hull. The figures in these drawings resembled his missing crewmates, but their proportions seemed subtly wrong, elongated in ways that suggested transformation or adaptation to environments never meant for human habitation. The most disturbing series of drawings appeared during Henriksen's final year of life, created with charcoal and ink, that he somehow obtained despite strict restrictions on materials that could be used for self-harm. These images showed the SS Keweenaw from an external perspective, drifting alone on Lake Superior, while 9 shadowy figures stood along her deck rails. 8 of the figures were clearly identifiable as his missing crewmates, but they appeared changed in fundamental ways, taller and thinner than human proportions should allow, with faces that seemed to reflect light from impossible angles. The 9th figure was smaller and more recognizably human, but it was positioned apart from the others and appeared to be hiding behind the ship's smokestack. Dr. Thornfield's investigation into the Keweenaw mystery, conducted nearly a century after the original events, uncovered asylum records that revealed the full extent of Henriksen's artistic obsession. The staff had initially encouraged his drawing as therapeutic activity, but his sketches gradually became so detailed and disturbing that they were confiscated and stored in sealed files that weren't opened again until Thornfield's research in 1987. The collection contained over 300 drawings spanning 3 decades, documenting what appeared to be an ongoing mental dialogue with memories that conventional psychiatric treatment could never access. The breakthrough in understanding Henriksen's condition came through analysis of his final drawings, created just weeks before his death in 1924. These images showed not just the Keweenaw and her transformed crew, but detailed maps of underground passages that seemed to connect the Ishpaming deep mine to vast cavern systems beneath Lake Superior itself. The drawings included notations in a mixture of English and symbols that resembled no known human writing system, suggesting that Henriksen's mind had somehow retained knowledge of languages or communication methods encountered during his brief exposure to whatever inhabited the depths beneath the ore. Mining company archives that Thornfield discovered in 1989 confirmed the accuracy of Henriksen's underground maps in ways that defied rational explanation. Geological surveys conducted during the 1920s had indeed located extensive cavern networks beneath the western shore of Lake Superior, connecting inland mining sites to underwater cave systems that extended far beneath the lake bottom. The surveys were discontinued after several exploration teams reported acoustic phenomena similar to those described in the original Ishpaming deep mine records, and the cavern entrances were sealed with concrete barriers that remained in place throughout the 20th century. The final piece of evidence emerged from Thornfield's examination of Great Lakes shipping records spanning the decade following the Keweenaw incident. Between 1893 and 1902, 7 other ore freighters had experienced unexplained crew disappearances while carrying cargo from deep mining operations around Lake Superior. In each case, one or two crew members survived in states of traumatic muteness similar to Henriksen's condition, while the remaining sailors vanished without trace from vessels that showed no signs of violence or emergency evacuation. The pattern suggested that whatever had claimed the Quina's crew continued to operate throughout the region, using iron ore as a conduit to reach ships sailing the surface waters above. Insurance company records that Thornfield obtained through legal channels revealed that maritime insurers had quietly stopped covering vessels that carried ore from certain deep mining operations, citing unusual risk factors that made such shipments uninsurable under standard policies. The affected mines included every operation that had excavated below 300 feet in the Lake Superior Basin, suggesting that industry executives understood the connection between deep extraction and crew disappearances, even if they couldn't publicly acknowledge the supernatural implications. The most chilling discovery came in correspondence between mining company executives and Federal Geological Survey teams, documents that remained classified until Thornfield's Freedom of Information Act requests forced their release in 1991. A letter dated March 15, 1894, from the Director of the U.S. Geological Survey to the Secretary of the Interior contained warnings about acoustic anomalies and personnel losses associated with deep mining operations around the Great Lakes. The letter recommended immediate cessation of excavation below 250 feet in the region, citing evidence of extensive natural cavern systems that may extend beneath multiple states and possibly into Canada. The government's response revealed a cover-up that had lasted nearly a century. Federal agents had quietly investigated the mining disappearances and concluded that deep excavation was intersecting with geological formations of unknown origin and extent that posed risks to human life that couldn't be adequately explained to the public. The solution was administrative rather than scientific. Mining permits for deep operations were simply denied without explanation, and existing deep mines were forced to cease operations through regulatory pressure that avoided any mention of the real reasons for closure. Dr. Thornfield's final report on the SS Quinault presented a theory that challenged every assumption about the boundaries between geological and psychological horror. The evidence suggested that deep mining operations around Lake Superior had intersected with vast underground systems inhabited by intelligences that could influence human behavior through acoustic manipulation, using iron ore as a medium to transmit their calls to the surface world. The 8 sailors who disappeared from the Quinault had heard those calls and followed them into depths that existed not just beneath their ship, but beneath the very foundations of human understanding about what lay hidden in the dark places of the earth. Jakob Henriksen's drawings provided the only visual record of what those men had encountered, images that suggested transformation rather than destruction, a joining with intelligences so ancient and alien that human minds could only survive the contact by retreating into protective silence that lasted until death finally released them from memories too terrible to share with the surface world above.